Good morning.
Morning.
Appreciate everybody being here today. For those that don't know, my name is Scott Donaldson, and I'm honored to serve as the presiding officer for this committee. And again, thank you for everyone for being here. With that being said, I would like to call the meeting to order. And then I believe, Miranda, you're going to do the roll call, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Presiding Officer, Director Scott Donaldson.
Present.
Assistant Presiding Officer, Captain Oscar Hernandez.
Present.
Chief Alan Banks.
Present.
Officer Shannon Barker. Here. Sheriff Jack Curd.
Here.
Lana Goodgill, is that how I say it?
It's Gudgel
Gudgill.
here.
Lana Gudgill. Sergeant Jeff Lake.
Here.
Training Coordinator Jay McClellan.
Here.
Sergeant Renee Morales.
Here.
Pat Rios.
Here.
Chief Deputy Salvador Rodriguez. Assistant Chief Jay Tillerson.
Here.
Deputy Chief Marcus Wall.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. Everybody have an agenda that needs one here in front of you? Should, all right. Next agenda item will be welcome and remarks from myself. I have very few. I think I've already done it. I just want to welcome everybody here. Again, I think this is a very important task that we have in front of us today. Something that I've been really interested in for many years, so I'm honored to be here to be part of it and have a voice at the table also. And I really look forward to everybody's input. We have a great representation from different entities, so I think we're going to be able to put something really good together for the commission to look at and to get a rule change, because that is what will be required, is to actually get a rule change. So with that, we're going to move down to number 2. Yeah.
Boss has a few words.
Well, sure, absolutely, Director Stevens.
Yeah, real quick, just so that all of you know, and I think we probably have had some degree of conversation about it to make sure that everyone kind of understands why we're doing this to begin with. Those of you that are familiar with the sunset process that TCO went through recently, legislation was passed, mandated for changes and for new rules and new model policies that TCO established committees to create model policies that every agency must adopt, to create new rules for TCO that all the agencies must follow, and that worked really well. And the creation, the composition of those, there was 3 committees. When I came into the agency was sort of after that, but looking at them, I thought it was it worked really well, and it solved good problems. The most important of which was that it wasn't the bureaucracy handing out edicts across the state for the way things will be done by Texas law enforcement. That usually doesn't work as well, because the longer that we are in these roles, we are not practitioners. We are not close to how things are being done, either on the training side or the operational side. And so as we had some challenges throughout the last year in looking at things that needed to be improved upon, needed to be done, the role of the training coordinator, the minimum standards of a training coordinator in y'all's particular case, we all kind of collectively said, well, we should solve some of those problems through that committee work that we did before with all these other things. And so we approached the commission, the Texas Commission on Law Enforcement, the 9 members that compose the commission appointed by the governor. We approached them and said, this is what we want to do. They thought it was a great idea. So that's where this comes from. We have 2 other subjects that we're doing something very similar to. So you are one of 3 committees that the commission authorized us to stand up. So you have a specific role. There's a charging document. We put out advertisement to get people to put in for this. More people put in, so we were deliberate in not only who to seat on the committee, but what you represent. We want diversity in agency types, urban law enforcement, rural law enforcement, sheriffs, school districts from all over, labor, public members that aren't law enforcement related. So the same way we did those previous committees, we wanted people from across the state. Behind the Pine Curtain, far out in West Texas, Rio Grande Valley, out of the Panhandle of the South Plains. Make sure that our state law enforcement is involved. I believe how that we will solve those problems is through a partnership with the licensed community rather than us in a vacuum here away from the day-to-day job of law enforcement training in y'all's case, some of the other cases, the day-to-day operations. So that's why you're here. That's why we've created these committees so that we can make good decisions and solve problems in a collaborative manner. And so I wanna say how much I appreciate you. I know you're all busy professionals. You've got jobs, you've got lives, you've got things going on. Austin isn't easy to get to at 9 o'clock in the morning. And so I really can't say how much I appreciate you being willing to get involved. I appreciate the work that you're going to do. We have a full staff up here, over there that are committed to helping you out. But it is you that will come up with what we know will be a good decision, good plan. So anything you need while you're in town, we're a phone call away, just let us know. That's all I've got.
Thank you, sir. The next item on the agenda will be to discuss and take action on advisory committee procedural and preliminary matters if necessary. I believe that's where we're just gonna talk about the charging document here and what we're actually hearing. I think everybody has a copy of that as well. And I don't think I need to sit here and read that. I think everybody has read through it, but I think it is important, I guess, what we need to look at, I guess, those bullet points. That the committee should consider disqualifiers for position of training coordinator as it compares to those for TCOL licensee, training and educational standards, continuing education requirements, notification requirements to TCOL for change of training coordinator record and prior applicable experience needed. So I believe that'll be the charge of this committee to determine that, and I think that's what we're here to discuss this morning. Is there anything further on that, Colin, that we need to discuss in that item area there?
Yeah, I think we can kind of set a little bit of historical context. You should have a copy of Rule 215-9. If you look at the role of training coordinator, there's only 2 requirements. And this is long-standing. This has been this way for a long time. If you look at 215-9A, a training coordinator must hold a valid instructor license or certificate and must be a full-time paid employee of that training provider. Period. All stop. That's all you have to be appointed a training coordinator for one of our contract training providers. We as an agency have ability to regulate that some in the contracting, but we don't think that's appropriate. We think it's more appropriate to do this. And if that's acceptable, it can remain that way. But if the committee's opinion or the committee's discussion leads to proposing more in that, we certainly have some ideas. Simple example is you could not be eligible to hold one of our licenses and still meet those 2 things. You know, so that we see that as kind of a problem. Shouldn't somebody who's holding this role at least be eligible to acquire a license from TCOL? You know, so you've got criminal disqualifiers, you've got behavioral disqualifiers, you know. So those are some of the things that kind of brought this before the commission. You know, the instructor certificate being one of them is, you know, if you look at the requirements for the instructor certificate, that person doesn't have to have a license, but they must have substantial experience in teaching or in a special field or subject area to be taught, to include 2 years experience as a licensee, so that's one way to get there. Bachelor's degrees and 2 years teaching experience or a graduate degree, so that again is the bar there. Successfully completed an instructor training course or its equivalent is determined by the executive director, and submit the application and perfunctory $35. So to get to the instructor certificate is the same thing. It's not a real high bar. Once you get your instructor certificate and you're a full-time employee, and if you go further down, you can actually, for associations who don't have full-time employees, even that full-time employment can be waived. You know, so if the Narcotics Officers Association doesn't have a full-time employee, but they have a training contract, they can name somebody who's probably working full-time for an agency, but that person becomes a training coordinator. We waive the requirement of full-time employment because it just doesn't apply. So that's where we are today. And what we're asking of the committee is, are we in the right place? Do we need to bolster some of those things? Do we make it harder to become a training coordinator? And ultimately, when you look at continuing education requirements, should the training coordinator have to do certain things once they're appointed to maintain that training coordinator eligibility? So that's kind of the charge in a nutshell, but that tells us where we are today.
Perfect. Thank you for that background. That pretty much takes us to agenda item 3, is to discuss and take action on what was just spoken about on the matters related to developing minimum standards for training coordinators. And at this time, I can open up the floor if anybody wants to suggest anything, or, first off, I think one of the main things to Colin's point is I believe that we need to probably discuss some sort of criminal background check. I don't know to what level that might be, but training coordinator of records, they have access to many documents. You all know this, and they access systems that have a lot of personal information. So to me, I think that's a good discussion, but I'll open that up to the floor.
I guess I'm confused because anybody who works for the sheriff's office already has all that.
Okay.
So like to do a separate background check is just adding more stuff to a small department that we already are overloaded.
Like private agencies like mine.
Yeah, there's 119
It's not about-
police academies across the state.
So I get that.
You wouldn't need to do a new one, you've already
But
done
we
it.
would need to do, I would say that if you're gonna do this, you have to carve out for,
Well, they would already meet the qualifications. If we established a standard of a criminal background check, like for my agency, our training coordinator isn't a paid employee, so they're a sworn officer. They would have already met the qualification, whatever we established up to that point. So we wouldn't have to go back and redo it or do additional work.
as long as we're not adding more.
No.
Cause small departments are already, I'm probably the smallest department in here.
Sure, I think.
We're already to the limit, right? We're fixing to have to do some kind of major change, cause places like ours, we can't even become contract training providers easily.
What we're trying to achieve, I think, is you have training coordinators who could potentially have a criminal record and be able to access or submit records to TCOL and be the person in charge of that. And so what we're trying to do is clean that process up. If we want to establish standards that prevent someone with a criminal record, whether it's the standards for a peace officer, which would be, Class A or above, or 10 years for a Class B, something to that effect, then the training coordinator should meet those standards as well. And that's, I think, what we're trying to carve out here.
So that's actually where our conversation started. You already have to meet a very high bar for anyone to come work for your agency in a licensed capacity, right? Anyone who'll be a training coordinator for you has already met that high bar. And so should that just be the whatever the requirements under 1701-451, where you have to do a fingerprint-based background and where you have to contact each of the agencies where they work, should that be a minimum standard for training coordinators across the board? And if they made the bar that high, you've already met that, documented that at the point you hired them, so you wouldn't need to re-document it in appointing them as a training
As
coordinator.
long as we don't add that to where, like now, if you're a telecommunicator, if you're a jailer and you're, there's already, TCOL's never made that together, so you have to go down this line, and then you have to go down this line, you have to go, so it's already made it, so if you add another thing to agencies, I get where I didn't really consider the private people, because everybody that works for me is sworn, so.
Right.
I don't think about civilians, cause I don't have civilians. I just don't wanna add something.
Right.
If you're a big agency, that's not a big deal, but when you're, some of these places that are 10 officers, or like me, I'm 47, but that's with jail and dispatch. You've already pushed me to the line to where we're struggling to keep up with the mandates that are already here. Don't add nothing to these
And I think
agencies.
many law enforcement agencies utilize sworn personnel as a training coordinator. But you have the academies across the board that use civilian, but it also opens up an opportunity to bring in civilian training coordinators that may have a background in curriculum development, academic achievements, things of that nature, to enhance the evolving training that is already going on also.
I would hope a private training person wouldn't be bringing in criminals, but.
Well,
But they do, and that's what we're here for. That's why we're here.
If y'all get that information, make sure to forward it, cause we won't use them.
well, and, you know, to kind of, I guess, probably further set the context, is the chief pointed out,
We have 121.
121 academies, and then, so on their face, academies can do licensing courses. That's the difference between an academy and just a regular contract training provider. As of today, we have 215 contract training providers. They're a very diverse group. Some are online only, privately owned, they do it for profit. Some of them are councils of government, some of them are for community college, junior college system. There's some, you know, so we've got associations, we do have private entities that stand up just for the purpose. OSS Academy, Lexapol are some of the common names, you know, so it's, those people, Sheriff, don't have the burden that you've already met. So that I think that's the group that we're kind of talking about. The other thing potentially is we have officers or licensees, I guess I should say, that could get themselves in trouble, have a disqualifying event, potentially lose their license. Now, most of the time, if we take a license, it acts against everything. So they wouldn't have their instructor certificate and they shouldn't be eligible even under the current standard. But you could have somebody with some serious misconduct issues, you know, or potentially a suspended license across one of the three who says, I'm not gonna do this anymore, and they go get a job, a lot of times by not disclosing where they are. We have people that can get in trouble in other states. You know, higher ed hires cross borders all the time, but they're not real good, and I'm not taking a shot at Scott. I was in 2 different higher ed systems for a long time. They don't do a criminal background check. They don't do a what we would think of as a police background investigation on somebody they're bringing into that role. They do no more than they do for an English instructor or, you know, a HVAC instructor or welding instructor. So the bar is the same. Because they're contracted with us, we can raise that bar and force them to do something they would not normally do. And so I hope that gives a little bit more context. Yeah, I don't expect, you know, Captain Hernandez, he pulls somebody out of the field who's actively serving in good standing and puts them, you know, out at Florence in the training academy as the training coordinator. You know, he's not gonna have to do a new background check, nor would you, nor would Jay, or, you know, some of the folks. But TMPA may or may not, you know, they're a relatively private organization, if you will. You know, their standard could be much lower. I trained Jay in the academy. I was the training coordinator when he went through the academy. So I have absolute faith he was trained properly. But you know, so that's the kind of thing we're looking at. And we've had some people that, in our mind, questionable in training coordinator positions, not as much in agencies as in those, you know, private or other governmental in the case of a college. So that's kind of where we are.
I have a question just as far as for argument's sake, we're talking about criminal backgrounds for access to information, right? That's the kind of the standard is we're talking about they have a lot of access to information that if they had a criminal background. I just posed the question because I'm just curious. Anybody with TCLED's access has that ability, whether they're the training coordinator or not. And so it's kind of one of those things, if we're gonna set it based on a criminal history, because they're gonna have all this access to information, while I completely agree with the training coordinator needing to have a criminal history, for argument's sake, I'm wondering how many people, like for instance, we have civilians that have TCLED's access. Now, our civilians are hired not with, any misconduct or bad standing because of our agency, but you still stand the potential to have those people having access to that stuff regardless of the training coordinator having to meet that responsibility. So I'm just throwing that out there for argument's sake, that it's not gonna necessarily prevent other people from having access in those agencies or in those contracts, having access to information, which has always been something that I've really worried about, right? We pay civilians at a lower salary than what classified, and so therefore we have a higher turnover of civilians, and we're giving them access to all kinds of confidential information. And when they're not classified, I'm very limited about who we do that to, because it's a very big concern when I started doing it and managing TCLEDs that we're giving all this access to people that can look up everything. But anyway, I'm just throwing that out there for food for thought, that it's not gonna stop other people from having that access, regardless if the training coordinator has to meet those requirements, if they're having other people that are in that capacity, they have the same access for information.
Yeah, I think while access to information is a node in this larger thing,
Mhm.
we're also speaking to the quality of training,
Right.
someone who knows what good training looks like, so
Right,
broadening it to a holistic view of what training coordinators should, and what we want them to do.
right,
I think that's an important but relatively narrow band at
Right.
one end of the conversation.
right.
And that's also something we can look at, because that's a global thing, as you stated.
Right. Just throwing it out there for food for thought. We're talking about access to information and criminal history and stuff.
As CJIS standards are increasing and requirements are there, I think it's something to look at there is to make sure and I think they would, meeting the law enforcement standards and stuff like that, but we wanna make sure that we're meeting the CJIS standards for them also.
I think one way to approach this is maybe from a non-law enforcement perspective, and not to point the finger at you, sir, however,
As I point at you.
is that the general public doesn't see, when they think law enforcement, they don't see all of the intricacies of, we have non-sworn training providers and sworn training providers. They just think law enforcement and everybody should be held to a certain standard. That's what they think. And so when we look at this, how do we clean all that up and mesh all this together so that it fits a certain standard that would be acceptable to the general public, acceptable to our state legislatures. It cleans it all up for everyone and holds everyone to a certain standard. And also, when we do that, that would probably more than likely improve your quality of training, give better access to training throughout. Because just like you're saying, you have problems at a large agency, but you guys have problems at a smaller agency, right? So we've got to do something that fits the needs of everybody and sets a standard, right?
I do think, kind of going with what she said though, agencies that have like TCLED's access, it's the chief administrator's, it's his responsibility to make sure who he's given access to, cause he's on the hook. I mean,
Right, correct.
I preach this every day because, whatever's happening at my jail right now, I'm responsible for, and I'm in Austin.
Right.
And I'm sure that, I know big agencies, there's a big layer. I don't have the layers, like maybe writing parking tickets tonight, or dealing with a jail fight when I get back. But from an agency side, access to information is 100% the person. And when you sign the TCO or the TCLED's thing, you're saying, I know most people don't read it, but if you actually do read it and you go through that manual, you are responsible for everybody you give access to.
But that could fall back on the training coordinator as well. So like, for example, my situation, I decide who gets access to TCLEDs at our organization, and all of our employees are all civilian. We don't have any, we're not an agency, we're all civilian. So ultimately, that responsibility could fall on that training coordinator to decide whether or not these people, again, and narrowly focus on just TCLEX access. So you want the person that's ultimately making the decision of who's accessing that
Right.
to be squared away and make sure that, you know, they have their
I think, and I'm gonna go with what he said, cause I guess I've learned something that I didn't really even consider. I don't know why everybody that has access to giving TCOL credit doesn't have to stand to that standard. I don't care if they're civilian, if they're a private company, if they don't have, if they don't have what I have, then they shouldn't be teaching me.
I think we could probably hit the low hanging fruit at this point then. You know, it seems pretty clear that we all agree that they need to at least meet the minimum standards for credentialing. So I would propose that we start checking things off the list. You either have an active license in good standing with the commission or are eligible for licensing by the commission.
I agree with that, but I think if we make it that vague, I mean, are we talking about a psychological, are we talking, so if we say a licensee, are we talking L2, L3? I mean, all of it, or do we wanna go through and say there's maybe certain things? And I'm not trying to say that we don't, I don't know if we need to do a psychological on everybody if they're a civilian, but maybe we do. I mean,
if you're eligible for licensure, you have to have an L2 and L3.
correct. So I just bring that to the table, that when we say eligible for that, we're talking all of that.
Well,
Would it help if I made everyone a copy of 1701-451, the section that
It
covers
might,
what
yeah,
goes on,
yeah,
and then we can all
absolutely,
look at that?
yeah.
I think kind of to draw a real quick distinction, I think eligible for licensure doesn't mean you have to go through all those steps. Because the L2 and L3 are actually required either to train in a licensing course or for appointment. So I think you kind of got, I guess, I hope I'm trying to capture what you're saying, Scott. You know, you don't have to have lived through an L2 or L3 necessarily to be a training coordinator. But you must meet the minimum standard. You have to have a high school diploma, GED. You have to have, you know, you
So
can
if
have
you're gonna
no
be in basic
disqualifying
enrollment.
criminal history.
Right.
You
You would be
know,
eligible
so-
for enrollment. I mean, is it necessary for a civilian training coordinator to go through a physical and psych eval?
That was what I was bringing to the table, I don't think it is.
I don't
but-
think it is, but
I'm just, like I said, I'm just trying to get the low hanging fruit.
Right.
Because we can talk about these little one-offs all day long, but let's start eating this elephant one bite at a time. and,
Right.
You know,
no, I think you're dead on with the language you were using. It's somebody who's currently licensed in good standing, you know, basically is that's one way of eligibility. Because the sheriff's people are gonna meet the licensure standard. You know, so he doesn't have to do anything else. He's using a licensee who's appointed by his agency, who's in good standing, you know. That person would be eligible on its face. But someone who is not that, that's I think where you go into definition to say, okay, this person must at least meet the minimum standards to attend a licensing course or to obtain a license or appointment. So they wouldn't have to live in L2 or an L3 unless that's the committee's desire. We can certainly put that to the commission. But they would have to meet the minimum education requirements. They you know, right now for licensure, you have a citizenship requirement. You know, unless you're a special type of veteran, you can be a, you know, and that, there's a potential that may change this session. They're looking at that again. But licensing requirements, and I think TJ's gonna get y'all copies of it. If we use that, I think you can kind of say yes, 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 nope, nope, nope. You know, and say they need to meet these part of the licensing standard.
And I think we need to decide which licensee, are we talking 18 years of age or 21 years of age? Cause that's something else we would have to decide.
That's the committee's pleasure. You
Yeah.
could say they have to meet the licensing requirements for a peace officer. You don't
Right.
have to obtain it,
Right,
they have to be eligible for it. You know, so that would get you to the, you know, 18 plus 60 hours,
Right.
21 plus, you know, that's fire.
And you're hoping that these standards push to improve quality of training. In my opinion, is an 18-year-old gonna be able to decide what's good training, what's not good training, do they have the experience to even go through that process? I would push towards a little more restrictive on age limit and some of the background as far as education type things. And we can set the minimum standards more towards what we're looking at it for peace officers and take out some of the.
And I agree with what you're saying, because if he's saying that we're gonna task the training coordinator with making a determination on who has access to things, because that most of the time that's the training coordinator that makes that decision, we need somebody that's able to make, good sound decisions to ensure that they're actually giving the access to the people that need to and hold them to a different standard, just because holding them to that different standard then subsequently flows down to the other people that they're empowering.
Chime in real quick, which goes to why are we even doing this? What brought this up to us, and what we've learned, or what I've learned certainly listening to staff, is that when we look at that vast number of training entities across the state, the academies and the contract training providers, the success or lack thereof tends to come back to that key position of the training coordinator.
Right.
That is a key position in training, in Texas law enforcement training. So that's why we begin to look at it and say, well, we can look at this and see where the failures are occurring, and where the good academies are doing it quite often, and in fact, almost always. So that's why we're taking a hard look. All right, what does it take to become a training coordinator?
Right.
And some of the instances where you have I'm gonna call it like it is, a poor example of a training coordinator, they're not eligible for licensure. They could not get a license. They couldn't go to their own academy. And so going beyond that, if we want to make sure that the 121 police academies, the 200 contract training providers are successful and are doing good training, it's a good starting point. That's right. Okay. But might there be more that you put into there? So this is a good starting point. And so you're exactly right. This is a key position. And that's the whole purpose of this. As we take what you all do and go down the road to improve training, not just basic training, but training at large for Texas law enforcement.
I have an administrative question. I'm assuming we're all on board with following Robert's rules for the meeting. We never actually established procedural rules for the committee.
I mean, historically, the state would follow Robert's rules of order.
I didn't know if we needed to actually explicitly say that to check a box or.
I mean,
I thought as long as we weren't making a motion yet, we were gonna be okay, but.
no, you're fine.
Okay.
I mean, even under Robert's rules, you as the chair can open it up for any topic open for discussion.
Right.
Once a motion's made and
Right.
seconded, then there's a discussion period after that. And a forced vote at that point.
Right.
Or the chair would call for the vote. So you can have open discussion, and I've got my attorney not kicking me under the table.
Aaron, where's the cape? It's under his jacket.
Did you have
Yeah, to commit it to the minutes and as action taken, we would need a formal motion second
Right.
vote.
Did you have something to weigh in from the flip side? I'm just curious to see your.
It's interesting to listen to this because I try to put in perspective with experience on the municipal side. We had our police department and they reported to the city manager, but overall responsibility, the city manager reported to mayor and council. So we had issues at times, not severe ones, but at the time they seemed severe with some police officers. And once I would peel the onion back, it always seemed to go back to training. And we had an officer in particular, I think right before you started, that was perfectly qualified. He was licensed, former military. Actually, he was still National Guard, but he just had the training, but it just didn't stick. And so you were able to check off the box that he was trained, but it didn't really work with him. So he had to undergo some more extensive training. And I keep thinking this was a really good officer, but he only took what he felt applicable to him at the time. And he failed, so we had to move on. And that made us look at our training internally, but again, being a small department, the sheriff, understand what you're talking about. We had 27 officers at the time, and that included supervisors and we had a couple of civilians, so we didn't have internally the access to provide those trainers. And I look back and I think about some of the people that were training people, and they're not with us any longer either, so we've had to plus up the organization, and it always goes back to education and training.
I'm curious if we're looking at 121 academies throughout the state of Texas, and we're here for a reason because of some of the failures and issues that we've come across. Is there any data to show us of those 121 where some of those failures were when it came to these instructors or those that are in charge of the academies? What were their failures? What did they not have? Did they have education? Did they not have education? Did they have license? So I think that would help us in regards to, we can make all these rules, but if they had them and they're still failing, then I'm trying to see where the issues lie that we're missing. What are we missing, or what do we need to implement to make it a better
And
process?
I was gonna kind of ask the same thing, and without getting into any detail, or maybe it would help anecdotally, was it more overwhelmingly that if they would have done a criminal background check, they wouldn't have had the issues? Or was it an education thing? Or what were you all seeing, if you can speak without getting into detail? What, I think to your point, I think it's a very valid point, would it even made a difference if they had I'm just throwing this out there, if they had an associate's degree, would they still have had the failure? Or if they would have said, they shouldn't have been here because of this background check? So I guess maybe what the percentage, if we probably don't have that percentage, I don't know, but.
And Scott, I think, mirroring those two conversations, I think it's more than just the entry level requirements. What training have those coordinators had?
Right.
Do they have do we see a specific curriculum development training that these have had that have had success? So I think looking at that whole picture of it all gives us a better idea of where we need to head. Thank you.
And I think,
To speak to Chief Banks, we've seen, for instance, higher education hasn't seemed to make a big difference in the way people do business. If you look at the training coordinator and their role, especially under a extended licensing course such as the BPOC, none of those should be taught by one person. So the training coordinator in most organizations, their job is to select and deploy both the instructors and the curriculum. And we've had people that arguably, without, naming names, they had graduate degrees. They had, at the doctoral level. And they weren't doing that role correctly. They weren't doing what I, as a former academy coordinator, would have done. It wouldn't fly at Houston's academy. They were letting people fail, but their rules said this, but they weren't applying their own rules that were adopted by their advisory board. I don't wanna get way down into.
and with that in mind though, if you're talking about training coordinators, identifying instructors for BPOC and things like that, and you don't have a law enforcement background and you don't know what that need is for the instructors to be able to teach that, how can you correctly identify those instructors when you don't have that background yourself? So it's almost with that in mind, you make the argument to say, do they need to be licensed? Because if you don't have that background and you don't have that knowledge, and you could have all the education in the world on the education side. I mean, I'm a doctorate in business administration, but that doesn't mean that qualifies me to select who the instructors for a BPOC are. If I don't have that law enforcement knowledge, then I can't make that determination because I don't know what that really entails. So with that point that you're making, I almost would argue that maybe they do need to be licensed and have an active license or have some type of background in law enforcement so that they understand the need.
Well, and I guess one of the things I'd point out is training coordinator for an academy or somebody doing licensing course, there's no differentiation.
Right.
So the training coordinator, I've got a scuba company, I teach underwater evidence collection.
Right.
I'm not doing the same job that training coordinator is doing. So we could, I don't have an opinion. You could have a different standard for a training coordinator running, licensing courses in an academy, and then not necessarily a lower bar, but a different standard for a training coordinator at an in-service training only, continuing ed shop, if you will.
Right.
So we have two different contracts and two different identities, we could have a higher bar for running licensing courses.
Right.
I think there should be, I mean, but I didn't know we could have two separate ones. That was gonna be my question, but if that is something that
We have
can,
the committee.
if that's something that can be considered, because I know I saw you guys popping up when they started talking about being sworn. Because there's a lot of places that don't have sworn.
And I was gonna add, the
Yeah,
cogs, the
so-
cogs don't have any,
There's- yeah.
I mean, I know our
I
cog
mean,
is.
I have a license, but not, most of the COGs don't. There's 24
But
of them in the
I think
state.
that, sorry to interrupt, I think that goes to my original question, is are we seeing failures in that? Are we seeing agencies that might have a civilian training coordinator that we're seeing problems with as opposed to one that is certified or is a sworn?
And I want to try to answer that because I think that's a really important question, and I don't think we have the data you want. That's one of the things we're really working on is better data collection and how we evaluate academies. But I think what's really important to recognize is your training coordinator of a licensing course is completely different than Director Donaldson, right? That the students that you handpick your students, you do full backgrounds, you're invested in them when they get there. He doesn't get to pick who comes there in nearly the same manner. He doesn't do the same level of backgrounds. Your instructors, again, handpicked, you trained them, they know what your mission, they know what your direction, they know your expectation. And more importantly, the liability that comes with keeping a student who doesn't succeed, right? He doesn't, some of your instructors you may contract with, right? And you only see them when they come to teach the class. He doesn't have that same level of oversight. So expecting that any differences in the product is based on the criminal history of the training coordinator, we can't get there, right? There's too many other variables involved. What I can tell you is that we had training coordinators who are under indictment for a felony who are running an academy, and the question is, well, wait a minute, should this person even be there, right? When we get there and there's a whole host of problems, if that is the environment they're operating in, then how do we expect there to be success? And as the chief alluded to, we don't want to make the decision for what the standard should be or embed it in the contract. We wanted to give this group a chance to define what acceptable criteria are. But we know that we have passed the line. I don't think it's acceptable for someone who's under indictment for a felony who cannot be appointed as peace officer, be running a training academy and training cadets. And so that's kind of where we are. But it's not a specific problem in particular failures in particular academies, if that makes sense.
And generally, it's like so many things in law enforcement, I think kind of the former mayor alluded to, it's a people problem. When we go in and investigate, I don't think there's necessarily, I think there should be standards, and I do have an opinion, I think standards should be higher. I think it should be harder to be appointed as a training coordinator. Cullen's opinion, not the opinion of the commission on law. But when we get into looking into it, it is an individual not performing their role. Some of them have sterling credentials. Some of them have backgrounds that if you read the resume, you would certainly interview them, if not hire them outright. They elect not to do, what we, the state, have asked them to do in running the academy, that laundry list of things that are in the same rule, but below of what training coordinators do. So we see, and that's a people problem. But what we don't see, especially in the case of what I would term open enrollment, higher education, councils of government, is the next layer of oversight doesn't know what they're looking at. And that's why that perpetuates, I ran a junior college program. My dean took my word for whatever I was doing. They had good reputation, produced good products, but I could buffalo them into believing, one, I would use T-Close at the time as a hammer. I gotta do this thing that I wanna do because T-Close says I gotta do it. I didn't even know where to look to see that's kind of the environment we're operating in, but I don't know that an associate's degree or a doctoral degree would do it. One of the things we've kicked around internally is for us to build a more robust training coordinators course. That in order to be appointed a training coordinator is probably something that we could deliver through the MyTCOL experience, to where we go in depth and state expectations of what that position does for the organization. That's certainly something the committee could, and I did want to point out one thing, the committee can't make rule, so everybody understands the process. The committee is going to propose things to the commission for rulemaking. The commissioners ultimately decide and have the authority to amend. If you arrive at a place and you really like it and you give it to them, you know, there's gonna be public comment. The commissioners themselves can modify or amend it, add or subtract from it. So that's the full rulemaking process.
And Colin, I appreciate you saying that, because I know that we were gonna probably talk about that on the second bullet point here, but we're all in that. And I don't wanna get away from the requirement for like the age and all that. I think that's gonna be more of a deeper discussion with all of us. But as I read the room about the mandatory training for a coordinator, I heard an overwhelming yes.
Yeah.
I don't even know if we need a lot of
That was
discussion.
one of the things that I wrote down was training coordinators course,
I don't know if
yeah.
there's even a lot of discussion that needs to have, but that might be something we can make a motion on and move on to the actual, what are the requirements to get to that training?
To his point, it sounds like the problem is we have an accountability problem.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
holding someone to continuing education and to, because I think the other requirement for a training coordinator is that they attend the TCOL conference. Right, and that would be, I
Or
think.
designate.
Or designate.
Or designate, where they would get the information to maintain the standards of a training coordinator. We all know that's not gonna hold them accountable.
Sure.
Right, and so I think that needs to be addressed.
So quick question, cause you brought up the training coordinators training. Training comes up in that title like 5 times, so I'm not sure where the official title of it. But I remember a few years ago when I took it, there's a lot of the hiring process that goes into the training coordinators training also. Dealing with the paperwork, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
The credentialing and everything like that. And when I read these qualifications and so forth, I'm not seeing that as a responsibility of the training coordinator. But then again, I can infer when I read a couple of points in there that the training coordinator is responsible for basically all TCOL documents.
Right, and kind of to shed some light on, we currently do a course done by field services out in the field called New Training Coordinators Course. But that is not laser focused on the job we're talking about here. Because a lot of agencies without a training contract with us, you know, have a training coordinator. They have a sergeant that acquires training and makes sure everybody, and that person is normally training and recruiting, get married. And so that person or group of people are one and the same. And so the current course our field services are doing is kind of a catch-all for everybody. It's almost a TCOL rule simplified course. And so we're trying to do a lot. But the course that we've talked about internally that we would probably build for this job would be laser focused on those people running academies or providing or acting as a training coordinator in a TCOL contracted relationship. So
I think on that conversation, as law enforcement's growing, as evolving, as you're seeing things change, especially with the recruitment issues now, we're seeing, especially in the DFW area, the training and recruiting are separating, and they're two different entities. And if that training coordinator is more and more responsible for, you've got criminal laws attached to hiring process now. You've got offenses attached to it, and maybe it's something to look at. There needs to be a training coordinator and a hiring coordinator prescribed by TCOL.
yeah, and I think we can certainly
Because that way the training coordinator focuses on training and it enhances that training model where you're hiring folks with the statutes and the laws that are applying to that, and it kind of protects everybody and removes liability. And I realize for smaller agencies and stuff like that.
I started, and I'm not gonna lie, I started thinking I'm fixing to come in here because they're gonna come and beat up on the small agencies. They're gonna put more rules on the small agencies. So I'm going down there to make sure that they don't bully the city. That was my whole thought. I've been planning this all week. But then, now I'm here and then I have to agree with her. And actually and I know that y'all probably don't agree. I didn't even understand that people were allowed to do this that weren't cops. We are letting, I can't get a contract with TCOL. I've been trying for a year. But there's people that are possibly criminals that can get a contract. Like, I think we have a whole bigger problem. I mean, I think to be a training coordinator, you gotta have the license. I mean, you got to be able to get that license. I mean, because if you don't know the licensing, which I think, one of them said, if they don't know what we want and what we need, if they can't do what we can do, how can they know what kind of training we need to have?
And I'm with you on that. Perhaps to run a BPOC, that's something.
Absolutely.
But when you talk about in-service training and stuff like that, there are a lot of things that don't necessarily lend itself to being a peace officer. But those are training coordinators as well.
I got it, but if you're running a basic peace officer academy, the person that's in charge has got to be able to be a licensed peace officer in the state of Texas. No questions.
Sheriff, let me give you just an example. Someone who was in the military for 20 years and was an MP and comes here and has a master's degree and wants to teach a BPOC but doesn't have a Texas Peace Officer license. In academies like Director Donaldson's, they have an advisory board that oversees them, and part of that advisory board has to be licensed peace officers who are involved. And that's who actually guides and runs it. Just like we have commissioners that guide and run our agency, we do day-to-day operations, but we have a group that oversees us. They have a group of peace officers, and though it is designed and intended to be, those are agencies that they serve. So I assume some of the agencies in your area who send cadets to you to be trained are on your advisory board.
Yes, sir.
And that's meant to be some of the same direct feedback. Chief Banks has much more direct feedback on his academy, right? He can walk over there and tell them what he expects and they work for him, but it's meant to be that same feedback loop where even if someone had not worked as a peace officer in Texas, as long as, we can discuss if they meet
And
those.
I'm not necessarily
requirements.
saying that they need to be a peace officer in Texas, but they should be able,
It could be.
if they can't go to the academy that they're the coordinator of, they should be the coordinator of.
And that's why we have 217.1 up, so
Yeah.
I misspoke, you have 1701-451, which is
I think
more
that's,
about the process. 217.1 is the minimum standards, and kind of what you were getting to. A bunch of these are disqualifiers, or they're simple. I think if everyone goes and says yes, 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 I think it's the no's or the maybes that require discussion, and maybe you could go through, and if there's a bunch that are easily ticked off,
Sure.
it might get you headed in the right direction.
So just right, so are we talking about two different responsibilities? Are we talking about the responsibilities for somebody running an academy? Or are we gonna keep just the training all together as a whole? I think we need to decide that first. I mean, if we're at, I stand to what you're saying, Sheriff, is that I think there is a different standard for somebody that's a training coordinator of record for a basic peace officer academy as opposed to somebody that's not running a licensee.
Yeah, I agree.
And if we can have two different,
It's gonna have to be two different.
I think there's different requirements
Yeah,
that
I
are needed
agree,
for
I
that.
agree with you.
Is any,
Yeah, I agree with you on that.
open for this? I think, I wanna call it, would that be a motion that we
Yeah, I move that we delineate
Okay.
between a BPOC training coordinator and a contract training provider.
Yeah,
Okay.
I agree.
Second.
So Chief Banks was the second. Are you taking the notes?
I just wanna, not suggesting, I'm clarifying. Remember, most academies deal with 3 licenses.
Right.
So you've got the peace officer, jailer, and telecommunicator. We can single out the BPOC, which it sounds like what we're doing. If you run an academy and you do a BPOC, your training coordinator must have X. Is that what we're?
I think that's what the committee was saying, is that,
Well, if you do all licensing courses and you do the more complicated and in-depth one, then you can always pare that back. You could decide, we're gonna take these requirements out for these licensing courses, or we take these requirements out for all the other training coordinators. I think you take the more
I
difficult
think the
ones.
basic peace officer academy is separate than everything else.
And I agree with that. So we use, in our agency, we use TEACS to train for our telecommunicator licensed online course. I think
We do
it
the
wouldn't
same
fall
thing.
under the same threshold of running a BPOC. I think that we don't need to incorporate all licenses under that same umbrella. I think we can designate out and all agree that the BPOC is an entirely different animal, entirely different requirement, and separate out the BPOC versus peace officer licensed academy versus other
The
licensing courses.
BPOC should be the highest standard.
Right, agree, yeah.
And again, I'm just trying to clarify.
yeah, no, thank you. I am too. That's what, so, but no, I agree.
I'll give you an example. Genco 911 Communications, they are authorized to teach the licensing course for telecommunicators only.
Right.
And most of their staff and their training courses, they're all licensed telecommunicators. And by everything I know, they're doing it the right way. But so I wanna differentiate, if we draw a line at BPOC, then if we could get that clarity, that would help us draft the rule.
And I think it will cover all three of the licensees if we, I don't wanna say mirror, but go through
So-
217.
I would like to amend my
Okay.
motion then. I would move that we delineate between a training provider, a training coordinator who oversees any type of licensing and a contract training provider. So we create a
Yes.
delineation between an academy, be it telecommunicator, jailer, or peace officer is one category, and the other category is a contract training provider.
Is that more clear?
Yes.
Well, and that actually mirrors.
That's what I'm saying,
the way we
that'll mirror,
contract, so
that'll mirror the
yeah,
contract in
that-
217.
That's easy for us
Okay,
to
so-
work
And
with.
Chief Banks said he'll hold the second on that. Okay, so we're delineating that. So now I think let's just go down 217 to Deputy Director's point.
Need to vote on the motion?
Discuss it.
Now you're discussing the motion.
Okay, gotcha, okay.
Yeah,
Real quick, just because I don't know the level of experience and knowledge of everybody, that all the other stuff is generally what we call continuing education, right,
Yeah.
Colin? So it could be any number of courses, but we have the licensing courses, which are the in-depth courses that people have to take, have to meet a standard. A lot of that's defined by the legislature, right? All these different breakdowns, all the courses, the expectations, the lesson plans, a lot of that came from law and what every officer has to have. Most of the other training stuff is elective credit or continuing education. Some of those are still some of the same courses, but broken out in small pieces, right?
And there are, not to complicate things, there are some contracts, like Denco 911, I'll use them again. They do not have an academy contract. But they are authorized, some training providers are authorized to do either the jailer or the telecommunicator, or in some cases both. There are some sheriff's departments that do not have the internal capacity to do a BPOC. Either the way they see it or the way we see it. But we allow them to do the jail licensing course, which is 120 hours, or the 80-hour telecommunicator. So they are training, so I think if we're looking at language and we want to impact all three licensing courses, we need to speak about it that way as opposed to the contract. You may only have a training provider contract, but if we give you authority in that contract to do a licensing course, your training coordinator standard, based on the way I read your intent, just went up. Your training coordinator now has to meet this standard.
I agree with that premise. Now, I guess my question for the commission would be, why is the commission granting special dispensation through contract as opposed to making them get the higher level license?
If you go into the academy license, for a full academy license, you must be able to do a BPOC to include firearms range, driving track, all of those physical requirements. And so it is harder to get and is more intensive. So DENCO will never, the 911 Communication Center doesn't even have the authority to appoint peace officers. They will never get there. So what we do is we don't get them to the academy, we get them to the lower training, contract training provider. But within that, we authorize that one small licensing course. And that business model has worked for us, rather than driving them to a full academy license.
And is the current coordinator, I guess you can't really answer to that. Would that person in that role be able to be appointed? Are we talking about to a peace officer position? Or are we talking about telecommunicator position for that particular DITCO? Because that person may not be able to be licensed as a peace officer if they don't meet that certain standard.
That's why I was trying to say with the licensees, I think, I'm trying to see how I wanna say this. Whatever licensee you are offering, you should have to meet that requirement.
Yeah.
So I think if you're running the BPOC, you should have to meet under 217.1 those rules. If it's telecommunicator, it's those rules.
Peace officer,
If
you
it's-
probably won't pass the telecommunications.
So,
But the standard for like jailer, for example, you only have to be 18, where, I guess in certain cases you can be 18, cop it.
But the criminal disqualifiers and other
Right,
things are the
right,
same across the board.
Right.
I wanna make sure that I understood we're talking about is eligible to be a license, is eligible to be an officer is what we're looking at.
Correct.
Not necessarily they're appointed as or have a license.
Eligible to be.
And I think we can address the special contract stipulations when we talk about the minimum standards for that type of training coordinator. We can specifically address people that have special dispensation because of the contract. Is that, we could, instead of it being, okay, well, these apply to these rules and these apply to these, underneath the rules for the training coordinator for contract training providers. Underneath that umbrella, we can start to stipulate if they have special dispensation to do telecommunicator or jailer's course. Although they're not an academy, they have these higher level rules that apply to those types of contracts.
The way you said it earlier, if you teach if you're a training coordinator over a licensing course, it doesn't matter if you're an academy or not. That's what Cullen was saying, is it would catch some people who aren't in an academy because they teach a licensing course, but I think that's appropriate. The primary difference that you struggle with, the continuing ed, they're already licensed, they're working, you're continuing to train them. But in an academy, there are some people who should not be peace officers who are in, and that's part of what you have to figure out. They can't perform those certain skills, they can't do those things, and they don't make it through the academy. There's a very different burden on those training coordinators in a licensing course for some people who can't meet the standard, right? That's the critical difference for us in giving someone the authority to teach a licensing course is we're relying on them not to let those people through. They may meet all these requirements we're talking about, but if they can't operate a police car under stress safely, they can't be a police officer, right? And I'm counting on him to figure that out and weed them out.
Any further discussion on that? No? So then, what I'm hearing is that you would like to make the motion to make.
Yeah, my previous motion stands.
Okay, and Chief Banks, you said you would second that, so we will take a vote on that. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Got our first one. Now the hard one, right? Now we'll go through all the things that say what should we and should we not do. And I think the easiest way to do this is just to start at the top. And you want to take a break? I didn't know. Yeah, we can do that.
We've been at about an hour.
Sure, yeah. All right, let's take 10 minutes or so and come back. All right, we'll go ahead and get started back up. Be mindful of everybody's time. I know this was slated for about 2 hours. We still got a lot to do here in the next 40 minutes or so. So we've had some discussions there now. I think what we need to do for our next item is to look at this 217.1, which they've also pulled up there as a live document. So they're gonna try to make changes and highlight changes as we go through. But I think it might just be the easiest thing to do is, these are the standards that we're saying that they're gonna have to hold. So I guess we just need to read them and make sure that we all agree with them. So I guess, obviously, they've already made the change up there, it looks like, to say in order for an individual to be appointed as a training coordinator over a licensing course in any basic licensing course, the provider must have on file documentation acceptable to the commission that the individual meets the following standards for licensure. So let's discuss the minimum age requirement. Rule 217, it reads for peace officers and public security officers, it's 21 years of age or 18 years of age if the applicant has received an associate's degree or 60 semester hours of credit from an accredited college or university, or 2, has received an honorable discharge from the armed forces of the United States after at least 2 years of service. So that's gonna be and then for jailers, the telecommunicator of 18 years of age. So this is the discussion that we need to have regarding the age. Do we want to mirror this? Meaning that an 18-year-old could do telecommunications based off the fact that they're able for the licensure. Something that I will bring up, being at an academy, I will tell you that over the last 3 years, we have seen more and more and more agencies call us asking to send us 19 and 20-year-old police officers because of the recruiting and retention. They're wanting to do it. My advisory board has said that it's got to be 21. But I will tell you that statewide, if you have kids or don't have kids that don't know this, I think when this rule was written, and I don't know when it was written, there wasn't a lot of 18-year-olds with associate's degrees. Now with dual credit, that we are seeing lots of kids graduating high school with associate's degrees. So what I'm saying is the population of the state of Texas, there's a vast amount more people at the age of 18 and 19 that do have an associate's degree. So just something to keep in mind that we are going to have people here. So I open the floor for discussion on the age. Should we mirror it? I know we could change basically or recommend whatever. We can say it's 21 for everything, but I open that up to everybody for their discussion.
Is this an older rule? And I can't remember the specifics on the federal firearms carry, but isn't federal firearms carry in contradiction?
So if you read the law, from what I understand, when I looked it up, they're able to carry the gun while in the performance of the duty or while in training. But then literally like the agency would check the gun in and out, I believe is how that would work.
Well,
And I'm not a lawyer, that's for the lawyers, but
at 18, you can possess a handgun, but you can't purchase it over the counter from an FFL. So
Can you
this is
carry
the
it?
person who, huh?
Can you carry it?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
And peace officers have very broad, they carry 24/7. Once they get the peace officer license, the non-applicability in chapter 46 of the weapons code kicks in. As long as they're appointed. So the 18 thing, it just means that the department's gotta give them their ammo, or their mama's gotta go buy their ammo.
yeah.
And they can't purchase the firearm directly from an
Right.
FFL. I can't sell them one as an FFL. So that's the only restriction there, but in terms of.
I don't know, and again, we don't have the data. I don't know if we have a lot of 18 and 19-year-old people running telecommunication or.
So that's what I was gonna say. The important thing to remember is this is a minimum standard. It doesn't mean they will do it. It
Right.
just means they wouldn't be disqualified. So if there was a very small county in far west Texas that had someone who's 20 years old that they want to teach a telecommunicator course and they met these requirements, they would be able to do it. Most of the larger agencies that have deeper benches and have certain liability concerns, they're never gonna entertain the possibility, but we're always, and that's part of the reason that Sheriff Curd is here, right? We struggle with every day, what works for 1 and 2 man agencies does not work for Houston and for DPS, right? That there is no one size fits all. So the important thing to remember is, although we might not necessarily think a 20-year-old should teach it, do we want to disqualify a
Correct.
place where they need to
Where they
rely
need- and they
on-
have a valuable person. And to that point, I would argue for consistency sake, the one thing that I don't like is when one rule is different than the other rule and the age is different in something else. I would almost say just for consistency, just to mirror it would make sense, but.
So, and I know I'm skipping ahead, but if you look at B for jailers and telecommunications is the age of 18.
Correct, yeah.
So
So my argument is that we just mirror what 217.1 says, just for consistency and ease.
I agree. I think if you mirror, you're gonna be fine. You would allow access for smaller agencies. And where the question on younger age would come into play is if we require the continuing education and force them to meet certain standards on a regular basis.
Okay.
Yeah, a real simple way to do it is rather than rewrite this rule, if you're comfortable with everything in it as the minimum standard, then you write the training coordinator rule that points back to a training coordinator must meet the minimum requirements for licensure as stated in this rule. Then when the commission, either because they have to by law, legislature changes something, moves the bar for peace officers up and down, we don't have to change 2 places.
Right.
You're slave to this rule.
So, yes, agreed. So I think that's where, I think the top part of this, I think most of us are probably gonna agree with this as we get down farther. I think when we'll have the discussions about the other things, but. So I think right now, we're all in agreement that at least for the minimum age, we like that. The minimum educational requirements, I'm not gonna read them, y'all can read them, probably already have. I argue again for consistency, and ease. I don't know why we would change that either but that's open for discussion.
I do want to go back to the first part. I mean, the jailers are telecommunicators of 18 years of age. That kind of contradicts 18 and having the associate's degree. Do we want to just take that out, or do we want to just say 18? Because we're looking at training coordinator, not necessarily licensees, licensure, right? This is for minimum standard of the training coordinator. We're saying they can be 18 as long as they're.
I think the 18 has to stipulate with the additional.
So B needs to be removed, actually.
I think B is saying that you can do jail and telecommunications at 18, you don't have to be 21.
Right, but we're talking about being a training coordinator, not
And what he's saying
necessarily
is 18
teaching.
minus the extra education. So somebody could teach the jailer in telecommunications and not have an associate's degree or anything else.
Right.
And we're trying to hold them to that.
So like he's trying to say, if Denco, who only teaches telecommunicator, if they want to make a 20-year-old telecommunicator training coordinator, they could.
Because B's in there.
Right, but they couldn't at 18, or they could at 18. It's confusing.
so what I'm hearing is the recommendation is to scratch B and everything just fall under that
Right,
first
so
category.
either 21 or 18 with an associate's or 60 hours
For all licensing?
for a training coordinator.
We're training
Right.
coordinators.
If we start removing or adding individual sections, then we can no longer point from one rule back. Unless when we're writing the other rule, we say must meet the minimum standards as defined in rule
But-
X minus or
But
plus.
to that point, I don't want us to not have that conversation here because I think we are gonna be changing things, like when we get to the L2 and L3. I don't know if we're gonna just necessarily be able to say point to 217.1. Because I'm not exactly sure, in the conversations with people that we're gonna be keeping
And
everything.
my point
anyway.
is I run an academy and I wanna appoint somebody that's 18 as my coordinator. Do they have to have an associate's in 60 hours or can they just be 18?
If they're gonna teach the B.
If the BPOC.
It doesn't say that.
It does, so
Yeah.
the way that A normally reads is it talks about what an agency has to keep on file if they're eligible for appointment. And if they're a peace officer, public security officer, which we don't really deal with anymore, they have to be 18 and have those things, but if they're only appointing them as a jailer or telecommunicator, they only have to be 18, they don't have to have that. And so if we change it to read to be eligible to teach the licensing course, then it would be dependent upon the type of licensing course that
Right.
you're teaching. So if you're teaching a peace officer licensing course, which is the BPOC, you would have to be 18 and have the 60 hours or an associates. But if you're only teaching the jailer or telecommunicator licensing, if you're over in a cabinet that teaches all three, you gotta meet the peace
Okay.
officer standard, the higher standard. So that's kind of the way that we are structuring this, just for
Right.
discussion, like you were saying. When you
Yeah.
get done, you may, like Cullen said, decide to go back to the original, or you may do a revised version that just kind of has this wording. It's very similar to the enrollment, but it talks about eligibility for being a
So
candidate.
TJ, if I'm hearing you right, ours would basically say to be able to do this as a BPOC, you must meet 217A1A.
What I'm drafting is like you suggested, we're just doing a completely
Right.
separate rule. In order for an individual to be appointed as a training coordinator of a licensing course, the provider must have on file documentation acceptable to the commission. The individual meets eligibility of the following standards for licensure. So again, like you suggested, it's the standard for licensure that you have to meet. And then we're talking about what types of requirements you have to meet.
Did I clear that up? Everybody good?
And we would probably, the attorneys will hammer this, but make it more clear that standards for licensure, the type of licensure being taught or something to that effect to help tie directly to you.
I think that was my question.
Right.
Okay, yes, we can clean that up in the first sentence, but that is the goal is.
For clarification, I've heard it said a few times, this doesn't have anything to do with who's teaching classes. This is just who is the training coordinator.
Right.
Who oversees it and is responsible for ensuring.
That's a whole nother topic, is who's actually doing the instruction.
Right, oh,
This
yes.
is who is in charge of the instruction.
And who's in charge of putting those people in the classroom?
Right.
Yes, so. Okay, so I think we were on the minimum educational, we were discussing that. I didn't hear any opposition, I don't think, to changing those either. I mean, if we're gonna try to mirror the licensing requirements, then I think we're good there. Any discussion on that?
Not sure how C plays into that.
Well, and so it's funny, I just had this conversation with the commander recruiting yesterday. There's actually a technical assistant bulletin that's come out that is different than this rule that has not been changed from 2019. So this is no longer the current rule on C. Unfortunately, it's never been changed.
Not have a dishonorable, anything above a dishonorable is acceptable. And anywhere it says enrollment, we're using the old rule, right? This is gonna be to qualify to be a training coordinator.
This is no longer the current
Right.
rule. It's just never been officially changed in the rule from the technical assistant bulletin that came back out in 2019.
Yes, but the way this rule gets read is you have to have a GED, you have to have a high school diploma, or in the absence of those two things, you must have an honorable discharge. You have to have an honorable discharge to set those other requirements away. So it's a third way to get there, high school diploma, GED,
Or-
and then that. So for that, there is a requirement for an honorable discharge.
Okay.
If they have a high school diploma, for instance, and they have a general discharge, they're
It's
eligible.
okay, gotcha, okay.
Yeah, not an and, it's an or.
For purposes of discussion, do we wanna add here the instructor license?
Yeah, I was gonna say that.
Cullen, and then this is where you could add, I think if you want whatever training coordinator training or certificate, you anticipate that discussion would go there, would be
Yeah,
a
under educational.
requirement, right?
Basic instructor 3003. Sorry about that.
It's 1014.
So yeah, I think that is obviously, I mean, that's what we need to add in there is just their requirements. I mean, that's just a copy and paste, I think, in there to say that you have to have the, what is it right here, the 21519. Must hold a valid instructor license or certificate, and be a full paid employee of that training provider, full-time paid.
Yeah,
I think what TJ was suggesting is that this could be where we would discuss
The course.
proposed new training
Yes.
coordinators course.
So
and any continuing education.
question, do they have to have that as a minimum requirement to qualify? Or is it something like a first line supervisor course where they have X amount of 6 months to complete that course or a certain time to complete that? Because you may have somebody come in that doesn't actually have that course yet.
Well, what normally happens when they don't have their instructor certificate, and in the other rule, there is a waiver that they must seek. So if we, and kind of to give the overview, we were talking to Scott on the break. If you will give us the do's and don'ts, want this, don't want that, what we'll do is we'll have our crack legal team harmonize the rules. So we'll probably, if we bring the instructor certificate, the one rule, we'll bring the waivers that apply to that over to harmonize the two
Right.
in your proposed rule.
And as I look, as you guys do this live, I think this is the absolute great point where we have E, and it says whatever the committee comes up with, complete the, whatever we're gonna call the course, new, training coordinator course, whatever, blah, blah, blah. I'm not opposed to saying like within, I don't think it's an appointment, but six months of holding the position. Cause I think there are gonna be times where somebody just says, hey, I'm retiring. And a chief or somebody's gonna have to go, hey, you're training coordinator Monday. Just now know that you have 6 months or whatever we come up with as a committee that you need to take this course. And if it's available online, which I'm assuming it will be, it's not like we would have to wait till the next conference. I know years ago, y'all used to do it the day before the conference started. But I think we all did agree that we wanted a online training to be developed, obviously by your all's curriculum team. That would be mandatory for somebody to hold the position of training coordinator.
Yes.
And, okay, and how long do y'all think, to give somebody to take that course?
6 months.
6 months. 6 months.
6 months. So mechanically on that, this rule is talking about the minimum standards to be able to pick and appoint someone,
Mhm.
right? And then there's a separate that has the training coordinator requirements, right? The section that you're probably familiar with, all things you have to do. And it would probably make more sense to put it in there that you must complete that training within
Okay.
6 months. So we can have that as a note here,
Okay,
but write that as a separate rule suggestion.
so actually put that in the 2159,
Yeah, if you look at that,
okay.
it says a training coordinator must.
Must hold, and so it'll go in 215, okay, gotcha.
So this list is gonna be before you can get the job, right?
Right.
And then we're gonna add that in another place.
Perfect, that makes sense, thank you.
So under minimum education, I think this would maybe be the appropriate time. We've talked about you have to be a peace officer to get to teach the peace, or to be the training coordinator over a BPOC.
You have to be eligible.
Eligible to be a peace officer. Is this where we would want to say you need to be, well, here, I'm just thinking out loud here. A basic peace officer, in my opinion, should not be a training coordinator. But if we're gonna allow civilians to be the training coordinator, I see where there can be a
So
conflict.
you're talking about like, should there be a intermediate, but to your
That's
point,
kinda what I'm
okay,
getting. I think
okay.
if we're because as we all know, a basic peace officer is barely not a rookie anymore. So do they have any business being a training coordinator? My opinion would be probably not.
But you're gonna get into what you just said.
Right. the
If a
civilians.
basic can't, but you're gonna let a civilian do it.
Yeah.
Well, in fact,
Well,
Your question is, do we
We've
allow
had some-
civilians to teach basic peace officer classes?
well, they could teach the classes, but be the training coordinator.
we've had some very successful training coordinators run full academy programs, and their background was either a legal background, they're a retired federal officer who are not peace officers.
Well, we can come up with alternative, an alternative metric for civilians. But I think my point stands that a basic peace officer shouldn't be a training.
And I agree with you, that I think the caveat is a very experienced person, civilian, who goes and gets their license, and now they have a basic license and they're working their way up. And so I think that I don't disagree with you. Again, wanted to provide kind of clarity around there is that, all right, so you could do something such as they've got to have an intermediate, at least intermediate, or maybe they have to have an advanced, or this amount of experience would be something to solve that issue.
Because I think you also want to look at, to your point, sir, I have 4 full-time staff and I only have one that was a Texas peace officer. So it's one of those.
So the equivalency in other
So
states.
the equivalency in
Some
another
don't have
state or
categories.
something like that also.
I think the continuing education aspect is gonna help with, because I was struggling a little bit with the 18 issue, but if we're forcing them to every year continue to take a course or meet certain standards, some sort of continuing education, it might address some of the issues.
If I may, I want to add something from our perspective from the state. So I'm the lead training coordinator for our agency, but in all the comments that I'm hearing, I'm kind of hearing where we keep mixing training coordinator and instructor. It's two different, at least in our
It
field,
is.
at least in our agency, and I want to be real clear, at least in our agency, it's two separate things. The job and the duties and the responsibilities of a training coordinator like myself and the training coordinators that I have under my agency, their role and their responsibility is a lot different than an instructor. Now, me as the lead training coordinator, when I select instructors, I might not be the field subject matter expert in that particular subject, but my job as the training coordinator is to make sure that I go out and get those subject matter experts that I can bring in and provide that lesson or that instruction to my officers, whether it's at the BPOC or whether it's out in the field for continual education. That's my responsibility. Now, I get with the perspective of, well, a training coordinator should have at least a minimum of basic peace officer license. Okay, I get that. But again, what is the job of a training coordinator? At least I tell my training coordinators is, you're kind of like a guidance counselor, a college guidance counselor. You're telling our officers what they're missing, what they need, what classes they need to do, where they are in their hours, if they're in compliance or not in compliance with TCOL. That is the sole responsibility of a training coordinator. Now, our training coordinators, like myself, we have two duties. Like myself, I'm a training coordinator. That means that I have responsibility with all the documentation, administration from start to go, from A to Z. But at the same time, like myself, I'm an instructor and I can teach majority of the subjects that are part of the BPOC or anything outside of the BPOC. Now, again, this is a large agency. I can't compare myself to a smaller agency, but I just want to make sure as we define these minimums, it's two totally separate, at least in my opinion, roles, because we keep, at least that's what I'm hearing.
I think what the conversation is, and you're correct, sir, thank you, but when you look at one of the major roles of a training coordinator, obviously, is appointing and supervising qualified instructors. I think to your point, I'm just being anecdotal, does a 2-year basic peace officer have the experience to appoint and supervise qualified instructors?
And the one thing I'll add about tying it to TCOL certificates, and the one thing I will argue against on that just a little bit, is that the TCOL certificates are tied to military and education. The faster you have both of those, the quicker you can obtain those. So you've got somebody that comes in on work experience, for instance, into our academy, and in the past, especially, our senior police officer was tied to having a master's certificate from TCOL, and that was way before military was marked as an equivalent for those certificates. And I had guys that had 18 years on that could not obtain their masters because of the military. They had all kinds of experience, but because that education and military was tied to those levels of certificates, it was very limiting for those guys to be able to promote. So I kind of don't like tying it to the certificate, only because you're really limiting somebody. I don't know that formal education in military necessarily is gonna designate whether you're a better training coordinator or not. I think that there's somebody that comes in and work experience that maybe can't obtain their intermediate until 4 years on, that is just as capable of doing that role. as somebody else. It depends on their experience and their expertise and things like that. So I don't know that I necessarily like tying it to that certificate.
I agree, because I mean, even the civil service laws say that to be a police chief in the state of Texas, you only need 5 years of bona fide experience and an intermediate. So you can be a police chief, but you can't qualify to be a training coordinator. It would blow the mind of some people, so.
And if I may, I wanna give you the perspective of what a training coordinator means to us, what we look at in terms of regulation. A training coordinator has to be a good record keeper, has to enforce the rules, especially in if you're looking at the BPOC or a licensing course, every academy is required to have a student manual, which is the contract between the provider and the student. Here's what you're going to do to get out the back end to graduate this thing. Here's what we're going to do for you as the training provider. And so the training coordinator makes sure that attendance and grade keeping and record keeping and they are on the hook to report. They may have a staff member actually getting the rosters entered, but they're two people we communicate with in a training contract. Whoever's listed as the chief administrator and the training coordinator. Those are the two people we look at. Most of the time they're licensees. One of the leverages we have is we can act against their license. We can act against their instructor certificate. We take their instructor certificate away from them, they can no longer be a training court. That's the one thing that's in the requirements now. So, and it's been my experience, I've seen it, spent a long time in the training business. There are people who have never pulled a shift in law enforcement. They make excellent training coordinators because it's a chess match. They are moving the pieces. They are ensuring that the right people are teaching the BPOC. So I've got an assistant district attorney who doesn't even have a TCOL instructor certificate, but they're teaching code of criminal procedure because they've lived it, and because they're the ones who are gonna interpret it, or I've got, I use attorneys a lot of times to teach law, or I'm gonna use a victims counselor or a victims advocate from the DA's office or internal to the law enforcement agency to come talk about some of the topics in the BPOC. Never had a TCOL license, doesn't even have a TCOL instructor certificate. One thing I do wanna remind you, the only person in the state of Texas required to have a TCOL instructor certificate is a training coordinator.
And do keep that in mind, and Captain, you bring up a great point. The person that what we're talking about setting minimum standards for is the training coordinator of the academy or the contract training provider. And while a very large agency has a number of people involved in it, there is one training coordinator identified to TCOL, and that is the person that we interact with, and that is the person that we are looking at setting minimum standards for. And so it's that one person. You can have other layers of it, maybe they're training coordinators, whatever they're called, but the training coordinator for this contract training provider or this academy, that's the one that we're defining for. That's our that's our task.
So I get that, and so I'm hearing, so there's civilians, but if you're licensed, you're gonna take action against their license if they mess up. What if they're the civilian one? What are you gonna do to them?
They're basically
We have the authority to pull their contract and we have the authority to issue administrative penalties. We can get in their wallet.
And ultimately,
There's more penalties for a license holder.
there is, but
So
there's
why
also
don't we
the
just make
ability.
license holders, you have to be a license holder? I mean, we're setting standards, we're holding one, to do the same job, we're holding one person at a higher standard than we're holding the others. If you're a licensee, you're held to a higher standard, which we are. But if you're gonna do this job as a training coordinator, you ought to be held to that same standard that the rest of us are. I mean, if you're gonna be a training coordinator, you ought to be held to the same standard across the board.
Doesn't it have
And
the
it should
same
be high.
effect though, it has the same effect as taking the license when it takes their job away. When you terminate the contract or take their instructor.
And we can impact the contract we have.
How many contracts has TCOL taken away?
Yeah, but how's a call gonna have a licensed
Yeah.
police officer as their trainer? coordinator? Who's gonna hold their commission? Somebody's gonna have to hold their commission. You know, I mean, it's a whole lot more difficult when you're talking about this. I don't necessarily disagree with you. I'm struggling thinking that an 18-year-old could be, you know, a training coordinator.
See, and I'm not, unfortunately, my dispatch and my jail right now is full of, I think they're all 20, cause at the Christmas party, we couldn't have alcohol because everybody was. And that's just the way it is, I mean, and I got things out trying to hire all the time. So if we're talking about a training coordinator, which should be, if not on the level of the chief administrator, I mean, I'm talking about the bar should be way up there. I mean, you said there's 200 academies, there's 100 and something, so there's 300 and something of these. That's all there is in the state of Texas. Cause you're talking about the one guy, like if he's the boss of DPS, he is the training coordinator for DPS, then he's where the buck stops. You're talking about the one person, that's what we're here to do, is the one person.
And Sheriff, two things. One, that's why it's so important you're here when you talk about having 20-year-olds, so that everybody understands the reality of what you're dealing with and how the rules impact that. But the second part is what you're talking about. I'm over the enforcement divisions, and my investigators struggle with the same things you do. And the way I explain it, and you know, in the criminal work you do, is we have a lot of different tools available to us in different situations, and that's the way you have to view it, as tools. So the training coordinators have to have an instructor license or an instructor certificate, right? So they may not have a license, but I can take action against their certificate. I can take action against the contract, not just taking the contract away. We can put them at risk status. We can put them on probation. We can change the terms of the contract. We've done that in certain situations. We could issue administrative penalties. We can do fines. And so we have in the past used all of those tools with success. We don't have to be able to take action against their license or appointment in order to get the impact that we want to. I understand what you're saying because I deal with that all the time. I have city managers who hire chiefs of police and they don't do the background properly. And I can't discipline a city manager, but there are other tools that I can use to get them into compliance than we do. So I think that requiring them to have a license is not necessary in order for us to get the academy to do what we want. That we do have other tools in the game.
And as long as they meet the requirements of a licensee, those two could be, I mean, they're essentially the equivalent, right?
All right. So circling back to the education requirements.
Real quick, I had to put notes at the bottom about the 6 months of training and then about the basic peace officer. So when you're done with all this, I think when you go back, I think with the final project, you're gonna look and say, I don't think that the proficiency certificate needs to be included, but that we can go back and reevaluate what we're done.
Yeah, I mean, I see where he's at because I don't like basic peace officers going to anything other than intermediate classes. Like, I don't think you should get to go to SWAT school until you've went through all your intermediate classes. I fight this battle all the time with rookies. I mean, I got 2 of them that I'll have a note on my deal saying that they want, but just because they're a basic doesn't mean nothing, because it's kind of like what she said. If she's got a doctorate degree, she can become a master's in 5 years. That does not mean that she's got the same knowledge that that guy that's got 5 years hard beat in the streets.
Right.
Yeah, no, yeah, we could keep it in the notes to discuss, but I thought we were at a point where we just.
But I think that you're right though,
we weren't
that's gonna go, I mean, that's not gonna matter because you're gonna have, because the civilian's gonna already get there. So why are we,
Yeah,
just because he's a basic doesn't mean, maybe he's the guy that got his doctorate, he just said, you know what? I'm just gonna go take that, I'm gonna go get it, but I'm never gonna go hit the streets because I'm a more of a training guy.
Yep.
I mean, one of the best instructors I ever had is a guy that I used to be on patrol with, and I thought he was the horrible cop. Like, I would never hire him, but God, he was the best trainer I ever had. And still today, now he trains EMS, and people love him. And I think he's a great instructor. He was a horrible cop.
all right,
But he does a good job of a training coordinator.
let's circle back here to where we were on the minimum educational requirements. I think we got clarification on what C meant. I think, you got clarification on that?
Yeah, and I saw
Okay.
that it's different
Okay,
in 13,
so I think we're probably good on that. 3, this is probably gonna come, this is where we'll start getting some conversation. Fingerprinted and is subject to the search of local, state, and US national records. Fingerprint files to disclose any criminal record.
Absolutely.
Anybody oppose that? That'd be the easiest way, I guess, of doing this. No? 4, has never been on court order, community supervision, or probation for any criminal offense above the grade of Class B misdemeanor or Class B misdemeanor within 10 years date of the court order. Open for the floor. Does anybody disagree with that? See, now we're doing it the right way. It just took us a couple to figure this out, right? All right. 5, is not currently charged with any criminal offense for which conviction could bar licensure. Anybody opposed having that included? Okay. Has never been convicted of any offense above the grade of a Class B or a Class B misdemeanor within the last 10 years? Anybody disagree with that? Has never been convicted or placed on community supervision in any court of an offense involving family violence as defined under Chapter 71 Texas Family Code.
Your Honor, Roll, I hate to
No,
interrupt
sir.
you, but going back to 6, we do allow people to get licensed and enroll who don't meet that requirement if they get a waiver from a chief administrator. So you could have someone who's been a peace officer for 10 years and you're now not going to let them be a training coordinator because they're under a waiver, right? So if we want to allow the same exception, so I don't think DPS ever does waivers, but let's say that they did a waiver, someone who.
We don't do them either, so it's okay.
The training coordinator.
It is my understanding that waiver goes to you all, it goes to the commission, and it's a case by case. It's not a blanket, like I have a waiver to go work anywhere. I have a waiver to work specifically for this chief administrator. I think that's okay. If we allow it to be a cop, why wouldn't we allow it to be a?
Well, but I think what TJ's talking about is let's say that in the agency, someone has gone to work for the agency and they're in the agency and they've been there for 10 years and now they want to transfer them to the academy to be the training coordinator. Can they do that because they're working under a waiver?
Extended that.
I think the exception that you would allow is if they are currently licensed as a peace officer.
Yeah.
Then they don't have to meet
Waiver
that
extends
requirement.
to
If
that.
they had a waiver or if
The
they
waiver
had
would extend.
an offense that
Right.
preceded, they had something in the 80s that allowed them to get licensed, that they still can be a training coordinator.
Yes,
So-
that,
So we can hammer that out, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I just wanted to.
No, that's a great point.
we weren't
Thank you.
unintentionally disqualifying people.
Yeah.
TJ, can I ask a question? Because I think you brought up a good point and I just thought about it. And I think the director mentioned that as well. So with DPS, I got 70 training coordinators. Right, I'm the head guy, but I got CID guys, I got rangers, I got different departments where I have low-level training coordinators that are monitoring what those divisions are doing. But I'm the head guy that oversees every division. So when we talk about this, are we talking about, and I think the director mentioned it, are we talking about the main guy?
Yes.
The main guy.
The main person?
You.
Okay,
Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure that I heard.
Not to complicate this, Captain,
No.
you're not the training coordinator
No.
for DPS.
No.
Derek Preston is acting right now, but it's James
Thomas.
Thomas. Yeah.
so we're talking about
It's the
James.
named,
When
it's
we,
the named,
T-Cole, are
yeah.
talking about a training coordinator, that's one person.
Yeah. it's the
DPS has a really good system of regional training coordinators.
Yes.
That's a DPS title, not a T-Cole title.
Who's ever on file with T-Cole is who we are talking about.
So again, the two people, chief administrator, in Scott's case, you're chief administrator.
Correct.
And Brian is
Training.
training coordinator. So those are two people we communicate with. So we're writing a rule for one of those two people.
And to Sheriff Kurd's point, the most important part is that's the person who's gonna be held responsible when the academy fails to meet the
Yeah,
waiver requirements.
and that's why I'm asking, because it's important for us to understand, all of us, that when it comes back to who is actually responsible, like, even though I see the whole training coordinators for whole DPS, really, I'm not the top guy that really.
Yeah, you could be doing a miserable job and you're good. You won't get a letter from us.
So, but what happens when those letters do come down from you guys, from Tico,
Yeah, there is a trickle down.
James Thomas, what he does is, hey, here, Oscar,
Yeah.
here's the letter, deal with it.
Internally, there's definitely.
The feces rolls downhill.
Yeah.
Premise, of course.
Going back
Thanks for clarification.
to the criminal offenses.
Yes.
So I know this is more Texas language, but when you bring out of state,
Uh-huh.
looking at
Oh, good
equivalent
point.
to.
Yeah, I think that's how it's always been looked at. But is there a rule anywhere that actually states that? Because that's a great point, like
Cause I know I've
like a
run into
like a DWI or something in California,
it's gonna be different.
that may,
It would
like,
have to be equivalent.
I think it'd be whatever that is the equivalent to in Texas, or what you would have been charged in Texas is how we.
We're talking about
That's a
whether or
current
not they're
standard.
eligible for employment.
Right.
So, yeah.
So we're talking about figuring out outside offenses?
Yeah.
We got a 24-hour class on that, we can get you signed up.
Perfect, all right, there we go. So then are we good with 7 then, on the family violence specific? Anybody opposed to that?
Okay, again,
Chief, that's captured down under C.
Thank
We're pointing back.
I just want to make sure everyone understands how broad this rule is and how it is applied
Yes.
right now. It is an offense involving family violence, and it's any offense. So we have people who got arrested for Class C assault or got arrested for disorderly conduct that was family violence, and we do not allow those people to become licensed. I'm not trying to discourage you from that. This is one of the ones that when I testify in hearings, there's a care, custody, and control element that was violated in family violence, and I don't want you to be in care, custody, and control of cadets either, right?
Mhm.
But this is one that some people, because they got a citation, can never be a peace officer, and they could never be a training coordinator for that same reason.
Does anybody have opposing to that? Okay, thank you for the clarification on Deputy Director. For peace officers, not prohibited by state or federal law for operating a motor vehicle. I don't know the legal part of having a rule, I know there's something, I can't think of the term, having a requirement of a job that isn't a requirement of your job. Like, do you have to drive a car to be a training coordinator of record? Are we allowed to implement something that isn't task specific or job specific is what I'm trying to say?
I think it goes more towards, could you get the license for which you are,
Right.
they're training people to do? I mean,
Yeah. So that, I just brought it up for conversation. I mean, I'm fine with it. I'm just trying to think of everybody.
It just says for peace officers, so I think
Yeah.
it's fine, yeah, I think
Okay.
it's good, the language is good.
For peace officers not prohibited, I think this should be everybody, to be honest with you, but not prohibited by state or federal law from possessing firearms or ammunition. I think that should be all training coordinators, not just ones doing peace officers, but we can keep it the way it is or open it up for conversation.
Again, almost all those disqualifiers are gonna be contained in the criminal disqualifiers above. The other exceptions are
Right.
exceedingly rare, like, denounced your US citizenship, or you've been committed to a
Right.
mental institution, or there's certain ones that they might fall under and that aren't in other places, but they would almost all certainly be, the underlying circumstances would cause you to disqualify.
All right, so 10, this is one probably gonna lead to some conversation here. Because the way it reads is, has been subjected to a background investigation completed by the enrolling or appointing entity into the applicant's personal history. I think we would all agree, we shook our head that we agree with that. It says, do we wanna go to the level of requiring the commission approval personal history statement like we do but to the director's point, if we're looking at mirroring the licensee, why wouldn't we be consistent? But now we are talking about you all having to do a TCOL personal history statement on a training coordinator. True.
Well, and not necessarily them, someone would have to do it. So two quick things. At TCOL, right now, our standard is any employee that gets hired here goes through the exact same process our peace officers go through. Every one of our admins, every one of our attorneys, and there was some concern when we did that about how difficult we were gonna make it. And we disqualified a lot of people up front, and that caused some concern. And in the end, everyone understands now that the quality of employees we're hiring and the level of trust, back to Shannon's point, they're able to see confidential information on peace officers, they should meet those same standards. And so we have been able to do that with success. I don't think that it would be a problem for academies. I think the trick is going to be who is going to do that background, particularly for open enrollment academies. But all those should have advisory boards that are staffed by peace officers. So we do the same thing with city managers and superintendents. They should not have a subordinate do the background of the incoming chief of police, right? You're setting yourself up for failure. But we recommend that they have another agency, or they can contract a third party. They can hire an attorney or someone else to do it.
I want to argue for this if I can. That might come as a surprise because this is going to impact academies at higher education that are running classes. To Colin's point, there are places that hire people just like they hire, like you said, the English instructor. That is going to change. I think that change needs to be made because I was lucky enough, I think, my administration, they did a full background on me as if I was going to be sworn because they actually did swear me in at one point. I think that should be a requirement to run an academy. Again, agencies, you're all probably going to be good, but when we look at COGS, we look at regional academies, we look at higher education, I think that I'm surprised we don't. Put it that way. So I would argue that I think we do need to keep the language in this for everyone because it is going to bring a higher standard. Are there going to be phone calls and am I going to get emails saying, yeah, how do we do this and who does this? we can cross that bridge when we get there, but I think it is an important requirement.
And I agree, I think there's enough outside third-party agencies
Yes.
nowadays that do these, that it's not that big of a deal, and I think it's important to get a total picture of who you're hiring. I don't know why you would wanna hire somebody in that capacity and not know everything that they have to.
I'm trying to think, and Colin, you'll know better, I'm trying to even think of all the college-run police academies in the state. I think all of them have a police department also. So most of them do, so, but I mean, that could be the onus of that police
But
department.
don't you at DPS use like a third party for some of
We
yours?
do
So
now.
there's, I
We used to
mean,
do it internally, but now it's not.
so there's enough out there
I
that.
agree.
And the COG can have a sheriff, the local sheriff.
Right.
if they want to, Right, and again, like you said, because you're building something that's so similar to the background they do, it is no different than any other background they do.
Agreed.
The report they generate for their own agency, they can provide to the college.
Yeah, it shouldn't be
So-
that big of a hurdle, I wouldn't think.
Yep, so then we're probably good with 10, other discussion? All right, how about 11? Examined by a psychologist, getting the L3. Again, I know there's a lot of academies that are, I won't say a lot, there are academies that are run that where their training coordinator has not been through a psychological exam.
11 is medical.
I'm sorry, it's 11 medical, I apologize, 11's medical, I stand corrected. Well, I'll stand with what I said, there's a lot that have not been through a medical, also.
Let me add something to consider, not to get too far off track, but right now, the world has changed in medical and psychological evaluations. If an applicant fails that process, if they're at an agency and they're sent for a fit for duty and they fail, and they don't restore that ability, we place a hold on them, and we won't allow them to go through an appointment until they go to a new doctor and they review the past doctor's failure and all the context of that, and the new doctor signs off on them to go to work. And so there is the potential that someone may have retired for medical reasons, and now they can't be a training coordinator because they're not fit to do the job of a peace officer.
Right.
So I think you definitely want to make it clear that they're fit to do the job of a training coordinator.
Agreed.
Which could have different expectations. And I think if you do that, that is consistent with what we do across the board. If you're medically fit to be a telecommunicator, you may not be medically fit to be a peace officer, but that is the expectation. So you're saying that someone is medically and psychologically fit to be a training coordinator and can perform the duties and responsibilities of a training coordinator. Captain Hernandez, for you, that's the same as a peace officer, because you have to do both jobs, right?
Yep.
But for someone at a college academy, it might not necessarily be the same. I don't think it's an unreasonable burden if you do it with that expectation that you're meeting the job duties and responsibilities of that unique position.
I agree. Any discussion on that? Changing basically the language from the job of a peace officer to the job of a training coordinator.
So the draft that we'll bring back to
Right.
the next meeting will make it clear that that is what they're meeting.
Okay.
Right, Aaron?
Yeah. I think it offers it even to agency academies if a municipality at some point decided to civilianize that position, it still fits within that framework.
Guys, I'm aware of the clock. If it's, we're okay, we got like 4 more to go to 17 to try to knock through this, and then we'll try to go to the other agenda items and get our meetings. I know people probably have, it was 9 to 11, so I want to be mindful of your time is what I'm trying to say. So we're good on 11, changing the terminology that'll come into the draft. Okay, 12 is the psychological exam.
I think the same thing, just make it
word instead of peace officer.
relevant to their job.
Is there a psychological exam to say that you're fit to be a training coordinator though? I mean, what do you get?
How crazy you gotta be to.
I mean, that's, I'm like, to take it.
It would be the same under the rule. You would have to get evaluated, you'd have to do the test, you would have to do a face-to-face interview, but the job duties and responsibility would be unique to the training coordinator.
Okay.
It wouldn't be the peace officer,
Okay.
right? So you don't have to be prepared to take someone's life, you have different.
And that's up to the psychologist that's been approved by that advisory board to determine if they can be a training coordinator.
But if we do not have one, someone is going to have to develop the duties and responsibilities of a training coordinator, where those are uniquely different from peace officers.
Yeah, okay, easy enough. Never received a dishonorable discharge from the United States Army, or Armed Forces, excuse me. Anybody oppose that? Has not had a commission license denied by final order or revoked? I think
Don't
that'll.
stop your people that leave.
Yeah, I think that's only common sense, but open for discussion.
Yeah.
Is not currently on suspension or does not have a surrender of license currently in effect. I think that's kind of common sense also, but discussion, no. All right, 16, meets the minimum training standards and passes the commission licensing examination for each, that, I don't know. That's,
There's no license.
there's no license for, so we just scratch 16 basically, right? Is that what everybody thinks? So we'll get rid of 16. And I know you said that there might be legislation, like, I don't wanna put something into, I guess it just gets edited later.
We're gonna, if legislation passes, we're gonna have to reconcile all
All of it.
that.
So just keep it as it is right now pending legislation, I guess would be, is everybody okay with that?
I mean, I can't predict the outcome.
No, I understand, yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Real quick on 14 and 15, I can't remember where it is, but your expectation is in any state, right? If they're in the National Decertification Index, if they were decertified in another state, they should not be.
Yeah, that would be my recommendation. Yeah,
We're not just limiting to Texas.
Yeah, if they got their license taken away in Missouri, then they, I think.
We'll make that clear.
Yes, thank you, very valid point there. Okay, so that was the big heavy lift right there, I think, on what we really need to do. Obviously, what the goal is, and I was speaking with the TCOL staff on break, is our next item here is we're going to talk about our future meetings and locations and how we're gonna do that. At the next meeting, I think the goal will be is there will be a draft that has been put together, I believe, by y'all's, and we will go through that draft. And then at that meeting, one of the motions that we will make is to approve the draft as a recommendation as our committee to the TCOL staff, who then takes it up their chain of command for everything that happens. Any questions on that? We'll probably have a discussion also a little bit more about the course to be developed that will be required. And then I think another academy or another item that we need to discuss. We'll have an agenda. And if you guys have anything else you want to add, I'll send ideas to them saying this is what we would like to discuss. I think we do need to discuss or just approve or whatever also the requirement of attending the training coordinators conference. I think that's one of the other things that we needed to look at. So I think those are our three outstanding items. Does that make sense? We'll look at our draft and finally get together a final approval of our recommendation to TCOL at the next meeting. We'll discuss the training that we would like to put together that will be required for all training coordinators. And then we will talk about requirements of the annual conference.
Scott, any, and I think this falls within the rules and everything, any thought on maybe having some people research this to come back with a package for the next meeting?
On what item?
On like have a group research training educational standards, have a group research the continuing education requirements, and come back with information surrounding those to kind of limit a significant amount of roundtabling?
It was my thought that that's what we just kind of did.
Okay.
But if we need to do further, we could do more. But that would prevent us from probably having them. I think what we could do is with what we've done today, have them put a draft together for the next meeting. And then if we see gaps, maybe we can say, hey, we didn't think about this, or we need to readjust that now that it's been however long and we're rereading this a month or two later. Because I think the charging was by May. Y'all would like to have something I will submit to y'all. And then I believe maybe me and you will be presenting this in June. The recommendation is what I understand, or that's the goal.
Would be the preference.
So would that meet your needs as it put together that draft? And maybe, I don't know, I'm speaking for y'all, maybe we could even get the draft before the meeting. That way we could all read it, almost like we would get minutes from something, and then all make our little notes. And then when we get here, have an open, like I thought about this in this line or whatever, if we could do that, that'd be great.
So to be clear, we're gonna draft the minimum standards for training coordinators for licensing courses. That's what
Correct.
we've done today.
Correct.
A second agenda item might be if you're gonna do the minimum standards for training coordinators who teach all other courses.
Correct, like the continuing education.
So that would be a second agenda item,
Yep.
which you can pare down from that.
Yes,
Then a third one is the rule on the training that has to be completed within 6 months,
correct.
right? Do you intend to define that or make recommendations on the training, or do you just want to create the requirement and the TCOL would develop the curriculum independent of that?
I'll work on that. In the meantime, I'll say, like, I think that I'll put together a lesson plan, if you will. I'll put together a curriculum of what I think that training should entail.
But I think that's what you were talking about.
Oh, okay, that's what you were talking about.
Rough outline,
Yes.
make some recommendations, so we're not starting from ground zero.
Yeah, let's work via email or whatever on that. Like, I'll take it up if that's okay. I'll put together kind of what I think. I'll send it out and then everybody give me recommendations and, yeah, a working document. Yeah, that'll work. I'm sorry, I didn't understand.
No,
what
you're
you
good, you're good.
Karen, can they do that? Email each other?
Oh.
They can work as a subcommittee.
So,
No, well,
because
You can
it'd make a
create-
quorum.
yes, so you'd have a walking quorum emailing each other for your, all of you completed your Open Meetings Act training.
They create a subcommittee to work on that curriculum.
Subcommittees, yes, create subcommittees, it's not a quorum, and then they can discuss amongst each other.
So our
use that
committee becomes a
information
subcommittee.
isn't passed to the other members.
It can't be a
Have to
quorum.
appoint
It's a
Until-
committee
until it
that
comes to a
doesn't
public meeting.
constitute a quorum.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you can't assign
5 or
like
less.
11 of 12 or 13 people to be a subcommittee.
Okay,
It have to be 5 or less, right, with the number we have in here? 13?
Yeah.
6 or less, but 3 is usually kind of
so if it's me and 2 others, I can have we can work via email to put something together to bring back to the table. That's how I understand it? Okay,
And that would normally, going back to Robert's rules, that would normally
Be a motion.
a motion to create a subcommittee.
I move that the chair create a subcommittee to establish a lesson plan and guidelines for this training coordinator.
Second it.
second it. I will take, I guess we have to do motions to make the subcommittee now, or a motion to?
He just did, so.
No, who's gonna serve, or do I can just pick?
Yeah, he can, your motion
My
could
motion is that he
authorize the
appoints,
chair to
yes.
appoint.
Okay, got it, so I can appoint.
Need to vote on that motion.
Okay, so that motion to appoint myself as the subcommittee chair to develop a lesson plan for that training. All in favor, say aye.
And to appoint you as a-
And to appoint people, thank you. So all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, if you're interested in serving, email me, okay. And then you had the other items.
Yeah, the one other thing, you've mentioned several times, continuing education
Yes.
requirements in addition to the training conference, I think is what you're saying, because that is
Yes.
the only continuing education.
So do we wanna make a motion for a second subcommittee? Are we,
Or are you guys building the continuing education?
Right, I think the
question-
continuing
that's the
education
question.
would probably be
Yeah.
kind of come out of what the curriculum
Right.
is.
initial plus what moves forward?
Right, so the subcommittee will bring back to the committee in the next meeting our recommendation of a draft of what that would look like.
Plus continuing education moving forward, right?
Yes,
It's kind of like legislative updates for.
Right.
right.
Police officer, you know, where something.
Our chiefs of police, same
Yeah.
thing.
Or the requirement could be that training coordinators have to attend the legislative update, have to consume it. That is something else. If they're not a licensee, they don't have to have
That's a valid point too.
So
Sorry,
that
yeah.
could be one of the elements. Scott.
Yes, sir.
You know, getting advice from my crack legal.
Yes,
They can have the draft out by the 31st, so we can communicate the draft out to everybody. You can't, it's cross-talking. But if you wanted to set the next meeting date after the 31st,
so we have time to look at the
then
draft.
everyone would have the draft.
And you're talking the 31st of January, I assume.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
There's not one in February.
Yes. Thank you, Director Stevens. And then this is why we're here, right?
It would be an attorney move though to promise it.
Yeah, I did like that. Since we're gonna be doing it that way, my recommendation is that, I know it might be hard on us, is that we try to meet in person. I'm just not a fan of Zoom. I understand that maybe things can happen. We can discuss that, whether if somebody can't make it or whatever, if they can join us by Zoom. But unless there's somebody really opposed to trying to get together for a couple more hours, I feel after that meeting, I think that we would probably be in a position that might be our last in-person one, that we might have to meet by Zoom for another one, but now the hard part is everybody grabs their phones. I probably need to go with y'all's availability, because this has to be recorded. We need to have the room. I mean, is there any dates that, like, hey, avoid this because?
Friday is not bad for people, the 7th or the 14th of February.
14's Valentine's.
Only,
You got all those, like, some of
Yes.
them are 6 hours.
You gotta bring heart candy.
21.
Yeah, 21 is good for me as well.
Yeah, I'm good 7 or 21, and then we
I'll be
can,
here on the 7th anyway, so.
21.
you'll be here on the 7th already?
I will already,
I have a
because
hard-
TARC
I
is
have a
that
hard block
same
on the
week, so
7th.
that's the end of the
Okay.
TARC conference, we're already gonna be in Austin,
I
so.
can be here on the 7th, but I can't be here on the 17th.
Is there anybody that is not available on the 7th?
Jay and I both have hard blocks on the 7th.
7th, okay? 6th, it doesn't have to be a Friday, we're just,
That entire
I
week is
can't
out
do
for
the
me.
6th.
I'll be traveling.
okay? Instead of the 7th, the following Monday, the 10th, are Mondays bad?
10th
February is
fine
horrible
on
for
my
me.
side.
Well, this room might
I'm
not
like
be
7
available,
days
cause we've got, what is it?
Through the 13th, this group is not.
So the 10th is available?
No, it's not. We've got, where's Gretchen? She's gone over there. We have, this deal, the Berry, whatever that is. Well, actually, that'll be in L2, so yeah. The
The 10th is open here.
The 10th can work.
10th?
I really think that, we should ask Melissa that. I don't have any idea.
I think that one,
Yes, it's 21, wasn't it?
They're going to L2.
Mondays are really bad for the sheriff's.
Was everybody available on the 21st?
21st, yes. 21st.
Yes, I'm hearing everybody, if we can do the 21st and the room's available, that's fine too.
I'll be in Lubbock at training on the 21st.
The 10th will be fine. This room will be available on the 10th.
Okay. So,
Scott, one thing to consider, and I know this is the future, the next T-Cole Commissioners meeting
yeah,
is what, the 4th, March
March
4th?
3rd.
yeah, I'll be here for that.
Commissioners workshop third and fourth.
So the Commissioners Workshop's on the 3rd,
Yep.
and then the meeting's on the 4th.
Yep.
So I don't know if that plays into if we need to have a third meeting or not, but that'd be like 30 days downstream again.
Right,
So just plant that seed.
okay.
Yeah, the 10th will work.
yeah, I mean, our,
But this is the main thing, and I understand none of us are probably gonna be available all at the same time. If we do the 10th, do I have enough people that we would have a quorum? That's the most important thing.
And we
You
could
wanna count hands?
support a hybrid model. People couldn't make it, if you
Would you be able
couldn't
to
make it
zoom in on
here
it?
on the 10th, we can support a
I'm
hybrid model.
teaching them, I'm actually instructing that day, but
Wear an earpiece.
I mean,
Did not be heard, yes, no.
Give us a second.
So 10th, that's the day that you guys have the room available and can record? All right, so
or the 10th or the 21st, I think, any of those.
going back to.
I'm a vote 21st,
This is a rare situation with the Clayton TMP working together.
Okay.
We're pushing for the 21st here, guys.
And who's not, and everybody's available on, and we have a room?
On what day?
21st, Friday again?
I can't make the 21st. That's our graduation academy.
Does it affect if my assisting presiding officer's not here, quorum stuff?
what about the 24th? The Monday,
Need a
the
quorum
24th?
to do any business.
I mean, I travel.
I mean, like I said, we could sit here, I don't know if there's gonna be a day. Do we have to set it right now, this meeting, or should I send out like the doodle thing like I did last time to get better data? Is it a requirement to set it right now, or would you rather go ahead and just do it right now?
It's not a requirement, no. You can continue to research the matter, get back to us on a particular date.
But remember our posting requirement.
That's right, okay,
So it would be preferable if we left here today.
With the
going,
date.
and then we backwards engineer posting and agendas.
We need at least 8 days to post
All right.
or have.
I say we go back to the original 10th when you said the room's available. So do we,
I'll make it work if I have to meet through Zoom or whatever.
Yeah, we will make a
I'll make
hybrid
it
model
work.
available.
so do I need a motion to have the meeting, I know 9 was was 9 too early? I was trying to think of people trying to get home, so that's why we did like a 9 to 11. Would we rather meet, I mean, I don't wanna meet in the afternoon, but if it works better for y'all, I figured this way
I think it would work better for me.
Yeah, it
because
would
I'm
work
on
better for me
Zoom.
as well. Afternoon would be better for me as well.
Okay. Could we do like a 1 to 3?
Okay, when I said the 10th, I was thinking at 9 o'clock.
In the morning, okay.
Yes.
We can do 9 to 11.
But I'm not really a key player in it, as long as they're available, that's fine. I'm tied up in the afternoon, but as long as they're available, it's good.
Y'all, what do you prefer?
We'll be here whenever you have the meeting. You need to work with this group. We'll be there.
Okay, as long as we have, so if after lunch works better for everybody, then we want as many people as we can to get there.
One real quick thing on the hybrid meeting concept. These are public meetings and they occur here in Austin. If we let you join, you can participate. But if you want other people and your staff to come and participate in the meeting, they can do that, but they have to be here.
Right, the lead
We
can't
don't
go out
open
there,
up the
but yeah,
hybrid to the
correct.
public because we don't have a way to.
That's right, and an important thing to note is for the hybrid for video conferencing in, it'll be video too, so you will have to have your face visible and you'll have to be audible here in this room.
So do I need a motion for the 10th at 1 o'clock? Do I need a motion or do we just set it? I don't know.
Motion's clean.
I'll make a motion for February 10 at 1 o'clock.
Okay.
Here in this room.
And we got a second. All right, we went a little over, but we got a lot done.
Got one last
Yeah.
thing that, if by chance you can't make it either in person or technologically to the next meeting, when you get the draft, if you'll communicate to us your concerns, we'll document those and bring them to the committee. So it is better, again, going back to quorum and open meetings, if you communicate that to staff, or you send us notes, we will bring it to the next meeting on your behalf. So if you can't make it, but you want us to inform the committee.
Did everybody already did we give these to you, Miranda?
Real quick, I know we just set the next meeting. We do have to ask if there's any public comment, just kind of ask the room before we get adjourned.
I'm good.
With that, then I think I would need a motion to adjourn.
Motion.
Second.
That one always gets seconded quick. Those are always, yes, all right, the meeting is adjourned. Or no, I have to vote on that, do I? I have to close the meeting?
You're really supposed to be.
All right,
You didn't vote on
you have to vote to close, okay, so all in favor of the meeting being adjourned, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, perfect.